And we're live.
And we're live.
And we're live.
Alive.
And alive.
Thankfully, the world feels like it's falling apart, but at least we're here talking about music.
Yeah. Exactly. Putting the world to rights.
Yeah.
One episode at a time.
If only the world leaders listened to the record shepherds, there would be a lot less disputes.
Maybe after we've done, our season's worth of music advice, we'll get on to world politics and economics.
Yeah, I think there's nothing more the world needs other than our, opinions about things. How was y'all's weekends?
Good. I had like a much needed chill out weekend, and like one of those ones I've just been running around. I was in LA for like 10 days, with work, and then got back, and then I was running around here in New York, and I was like, oh man, the wheels are gonna come off soon. I just need to chill. So I had an awesome weekend one of those ones where you just do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, loved it.
At what point was traveling for work less cool for you?
I mean, I don't travel so much for work these days, so it's not at the stage where it's like a real pain, and like I've got friends out there, and I like the people that I work with out there
that's a plus.
in the LA office. So it had been a while since I've been out there, and it was actually great to go and catch up with everybody. And so it's not such a problem, but I have had that in the past where it's just like, no, there's absolutely no glamour in traveling for work.
Yeah,
especially if you're cattle class,
definitely.
If you're fine business,
yeah.
Nah.
No T&E for you.
No.
Danny, how was your weekend?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also had a relaxed weekend, just getting back from a little bit of a cold.
Okay.
But feeling better now.
No monkeypox.
No monkeypox.
Awesome.
No, so far.
Good.
What about you, Tim? What did you do?
It was a good weekend. It was relaxing as well. I'm at a time in my life where there's a transition professionally, a good one, which is positive.
Ah, yes.
And
yes.
I think the benefit about working in the music industry is you kind of get to see how these different companies do things, their different cultures, and you're gaining more experience. And there's nothing more than I like to do than share that experience, because it's just the music industry can be like any other industry. It gets tiring. You get exhausted, but what motivates you is the artist that you're actually supporting. So I think as long as you can sort of hold on to that ethos, it helps, with the day to day. So I kind of took this weekend to sort of enjoy that transition and just celebrate with some friends.
Yeah, congrats. So reading between the lines there, looks like Tim has landed himself a new job, still in the music industry, thankfully.
Yes. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. I don't know how much longer, but yes. For now we're leveling up, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and but we will get the benefit of that, because you're going to see a new company, see how they do things, and no doubt learn from those experiences and bring them on to the couch to share with the flock of our audience at home.
Convince all my coworkers to be on our podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
The secondary benefit.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, I think we have an interesting episode today. I think today's episode is a real challenge for us. Honestly, I think it's the ability to take a sort of complex topic and simplify it in a way that makes sense. So forgive us if we are attempting to do that, but it is for the greater good, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So well, let's start. It's kind of it is like current affairs, I guess, at the minute, so which is interesting. So I don't know if everyone heard about the spat, the beef between Kelis and Beyonce.
Yes.
It's been, in the press and that, and everyone likes to, the press, they like to cover stuff like this. It's juicy, but
and, even before that, not that Beyonce needs my stamp of approval, but if you have not listened to Renaissance, I highly recommend you do. I love Beyonce.
Renaissance being Beyonce's latest long player.
Right. And I mean, I don't know. Beyonce is just one of those artists. You know, she is one of the defining artists of my generation, at least. And I don't know. It's just always nice when an artist of that caliber like comes out, and it's music that we can enjoy, especially in the summer. And I think, you know, with a lot of these different artists, whether in hip hop or R&B, experimenting with dance music, I think it's really cool because we're starting to blend these genres now, and you know, getting influences from all over the place. So I highly recommend you go listen to it. But this brings us to our beef with Kelis and Beyonce. Yeah. And if you don't know Kelis, you know, and there's been a lot of like speculation as to, you know, what rights people have and all these different things. And there's information out there, but at the end of the day, a lot of it is limited because we, you know, us three were not there when these deals were being struck, etc. But you know, Kelis is a legendary artist, R&B, pop space, you know, super popular in the early 2000s. If you haven't listened to Kelis's catalog, you know, not shame on you because everyone likes different things, but I heavily recommend you go listen to that.
Yeah.
But, you know, the big controversy is that, you know, Beyonce releases this popular album, Renaissance, and interpolates one of Kelis's prior songs called Milkshake on a song of Beyonce's Energy. So Beyonce interpolates Milkshake on Energy. And, you know, Kelis's main gripe, I guess, with this is that Beyonce herself did not get permission from Kelis personally to interpolate this song on Energy.
Yeah, that's a good synopsis of like the base facts. But as you alluded to a little bit earlier, there's actually quite a lot to unpack here, you know, about the facts, the laws and the customs surrounding this type of thing. And then, you know, a good place to start is, you know, what the hell isn't interpolation anyway?
Yeah.
So,
and how does that differ from like a sample, for example?
Yeah, exactly. So I think like that for any of the listeners and viewers who are not familiar with an interpolation, essentially it's a bit like a sample, right? But with a sample, you're typically talking about taking a piece of the actual record and using that in your own record, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously when you take a sample of the record, you are also lifting the song, that specific section of the track. Okay, maybe it's like a 10-minute hook or something like this. So you're actually sampling the master, and we've talked about on this podcast before, there are two sets of copyrights. So you're sampling the that section of the actual sound recording,
right? And
you're sampling that section of the
song.
The song embodied in the original sound recording. So that's what we're talking about traditionally in sampling.
Right. And then when it comes to like getting samples or interpolations, you have to go to that recording entity and that publishing entity in order to clear that sample for your song or for your
exactly. So you have to go for clearance or like permission, get the permission and the legal clearance of the, let's call it the rights holders of those two separate copyrights. So
simplify it,
a lot of the time when you're talking about the sound recording, you're going to be going to the original record label that owns the original sound recording, and you'll be going to the songwriter, or more often than not, the publisher of the original, who own the rights to the original song. So you do have to go and get those things cleared. But just to clarify, that's sampling. What we're specifically talking about in this instance is interpolation, and that's the easiest way to think about it is it's only the element of the song that has been used in this instance. They haven't actually taken the original sound recording, a clip from the song, the original sound recording. So, you know, that's it is a distinction, but for the purposes of this example, it actually helps things because it keeps it kind of easy. There's only one set of rights being cleared, and that's the right to the original we'll call it the Kelis song, right? Milkshake. But as we go in to find out, is it a Kelis song?
Right. Well, and then, but just based off of that, a quick question. So like with the interpolation, if you're just exploiting the use of the song, does that manifest in like lyrics?
Yeah, lyrics.
Typically, but it could be other things like melody as well. But
yeah,
I think maybe in this, and you know, hearing the energy, the interpolation wasn't that clear to me. And then come to find out, Beyonce did actually, in fact, take it out of the song. But that, just to clarify, like that can manifest in like either a melody or a lyric, but in other things as well.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you could, because you could actually go and recreate the original, like your own sound recording, right? So you could play it yourself. So you could say, I think that actually happened on like a Rapper's Delight or something. There was like it would have been a sample, but they didn't want to clear like the original kind of like Nile Rodgers version or whatever, so they go and play it themselves and re-record that. So they're not using the original recording, but nevertheless they are using the composition. So as a person like trying to make this song using a sample or an interpolation, is there anything that you are giving up when it comes to like the money that you're making off of this song that you want to release? Yeah, so you have to, that's part of the clearance process. You know, if you're going to someone for permission, you have to go and say like, hey, this is what I've done. This is what I want to do. This is what it sounds like, and you know, or here's the composition, like the sort of like, let's say the amalgamated new composition, including the bit that you've interpreted, and then it's it's a negotiation to clear it. So you know, the original rights holder, let's say it's the publisher who owns the original composition, the original song, they might say, oh, that's like a super hot like composition, like that's one of our biggest performers, like, and money makers of our entire song catalog, and they'll say they might charge a lot of money. So it might only be, let's say, I'm gonna make this up now, but let's say it's like a 10-second interpolation, like don't want to say interpolation the whole way through this, so I am going to use sample and interpretation kind of like interchangeably now, but it is important to know that what we're talking about today is specifically an interpolation of the song, a sample of the song. But yeah, if you've taken like 10 seconds and put that at the start of like a 3-minute song, you might say, well, you know, you've only used a tiny bit, like what do you maybe give you 5%, 10% of the entire song, but they might say no that song, that's a biggie, everyone knows that, like you know, we actually, do you know what, if you want to use that, we want 80%, 75% of the entire song. Yeah, and I'll say, working at least now in my career, working primarily with a lot of hip hop acts that use samples, that tends to be the case where the original rights holder is getting the lion's share of that song if you actually want to use that sample. Because oftentimes, if you know, the samples are sort of what makes those songs unique, rather than, you know, going to like an original, you know, well, I guess there is a producer actually making the beat itself, but the sample is the sort of thing that's highlighting the record. Yeah, totally. And it can, you know, it can be the thing that just like it makes the record. Without it, there is no record, you know. So understandably, these rights holders of these classic, well, a lot of the time they're sort of like classic songs that have been hits in a previous era, etc. And they're able to command decent percentages, and just to sort of you know, what do we mean by that? We've talked in previous episodes, when you all sit down to write a song, whatever, you know, you got to agree like who wrote what percentages of it like do we own, and because that's important when it comes to actually generating money off the exploitation of the song. You know, who gets what in terms of the dollar amount, the money in your pocket. And I think it's important to note as well that the rights holders can say no to absolutely. You know, if let's say your song is about encouraging people to smoke cigarettes or something like that, you know, whatever, you know, maybe it's not that extreme, but it's like maybe it's about something, or even in the style of something that the original rights holder is just not about, or they're like super precious with their songs and they don't want it to be used for any reason. I think the example that comes to mind is like
and I don't know too much about this one, but it's the Nicki Minaj Tracy Chapman controversy that happened a couple of years ago, where I'm not even sure Nicki went to actually get that sample cleared, or she tried to, and Tracy said no.
Yeah.
So it's important to know that like the original rights holders can in fact say no to your request for that license to use that song.
Totally. And that's almost like that might be like a sort of like a moral type point, and these actually do get written into contracts, by the way. Sometimes whenever a publisher is acquiring a writer's songwriting catalog, or they're doing a publishing deal or whatever, some of the companies will give the songwriter approvals over certain uses, right? And like sampling, interpolation is typically one of them. But certainly, what you see, if they're not willing to give that necessarily, there'll be certain categories carved out, and a lot of the time it's anything to do with like political messages, or like alcohol, or like cigarettes, when it comes to like, that's more in the synchronization license world. But anyway, but there's that type of like sort of like, there's a moral exception where a songwriter might have like not be willing to grant someone a particular sampling license. But then the other side of it, and probably more often than not, is just because they can't agree the economics of it. Right. You're saying you're only willing to give me 20%. I think my bit of the song is going to add 80% to the value, even though it's only taken up 10 seconds. And if we can't agree, that's just free market economics. There's no deal. You walk away. Yeah.
And then, the flip side of that too is like, maybe if you are a rights holder and you are an artist, like as you are a rights holder as an artist as well, and, maybe your footprint in the music industry isn't as big as it once was, but a huge artist would like to sample or interpolate your song, that could definitely affect your decision in terms of how much you are choosing to charge whatever entity to get that license and exploit that sample. And it also depends on personal relationships at the end of the day too. Like if you have a relationship and you are really trying to get this record out and you really need it cleared, then calling those rights holders that you have a relationship with can help get that done and help maybe favor whatever deal is needed to get it done.
Yeah, totally. And it is just a negotiation, and it is just like economics at the end of the day. And like often, you do just have to try to get it done. And as you say, like the original rights holder the rights holder of the original underlying composition that is being sampled is in a commanding position. But it depends. Yeah, if you've got like Beyonce wanting to sample your record, and you think about, or sample your song, and you think about the potential benefit, because everyone does that. When you find out, like, oh, that was a sample, and then you want to go back and you listen to the original song, and then you get into that, and it can be, you might get into that artist who's written more of their songs, and then all of a sudden the publisher's making a little bit of money. They say a bit of a spike in their revenue streams for that songwriter.
Yeah, and I find it's, especially as like a music nerd, it's almost like new music can serve as like an educational platform for catalog as well. And as especially artists back in the day in the 60s and 70s, where most of their tunes that were successful were covers. As sort of like somebody who was into music, you took the time to see, oh yeah, who wrote this, who wrote that, and it just kind of, when you're getting into an artist, it just sort of helps that like fandom of whatever that song is. So it could have a bunch of benefits. Yeah, but I think well, no, like so like that's a deep dive already on sort of like that sampling / interpolation world inside of the music industry. But it's an important dive, because I think we've established the foundation to then now go into what we're talking about now, which is the Kelis and Beyonce saga.
So I have a question for you guys. You probably know the answer of this. Did she write the song?
Well, let's go into that. Let's go into that, because we need to set the stage now to see, like, about this saga. Hopefully it's not a saga. Hopefully it's just a little spat, and they can solve it out. So because as you say, Beyonce has now actually removed that interpolation from the song, and it's amazing that you can do that now on with these streaming services. Yeah. Like
it's just a swap, and you know, it's easier said than done. It's a lot of headaches for a lot of people behind the scenes, but it can be done. Mm-hmm. So you know, imagine you are an up and coming R&B artist. You are, you know, you've been to music schools. You can play multiple instruments, and you're pretty well established in terms of like your rise. Mm-hmm. Your friend or manager introduces you to arguably the biggest production entity of the late 90s, early 2000s, which is the Neptunes.
And for those of you who don't know the Neptunes, that is was the production company of Pharrell Williams and
Chad Hugo. Yeah, they were, they released their own albums. They produced for a plethora of artists from like Busta Rhymes to Britney Spears to Jay-Z, etc. Essentially all the big names in music. They had a big hand in producing some of their most successful records. So, you're Kelis, you're introduced to the Neptunes, and just by, researching the story of how this sort of all happened and came to be, I can sort of read between the lines when it comes to a lot of these, just experience working in the music industry. When you have hands in the pot, but those hands are actually helping your career, that's when things sort of get a little complicated. So, let's say you have a manager, they introduce you to this production duo. The production duo then says, we're going to catapult your career. We're going to produce and write a lot of your records, and we're going to get you all the deals that you need to be successful. You say, okay, sounds great. Where do I sign? Eventually that takes you to signing a deal with, a major label. In this particular instance, it's Virgin, which is owned by Universal Music. And they get to work, they start recording, producing your debut album. And at some point, you have to review some paperwork. You have to review paperwork with your publisher. You have to review paperwork with your record deal. And there's probably some paperwork involved with this production company that's doing all of these awesome things for you.
100%. There certainly should be.
Yeah. And in that time when you're a young artist, and, this conversation maybe shouldn't even turn into like, it is, I think there is definitely a right and wrong, but I think it's about perspective as well. So like, I can see a young artist having all of this paperwork in front of them and these deals in front of them and being like, I don't really know what's going on, but I'm going to sign on this dotted line because I am about to be a superstar and I'm working with some big time producers. So at some point, Kelis is informed that when it comes to the songwriting splits or the publishing splits of her songs, because of these deals that she has and the opportunities that the Neptunes are giving her, they're going to take 66%, 66.6, etc. of her songs, and she'll get an even 33% split.
Yeah, so between Pharrell, Chad, and Kelis, that was going to work out is 33, like a third each.
A third each, right.
So that's what she claims. That's what she claims that she was told.
At some point down the line, that's what she claims that she was told. And then come to find out, retrospectively, years later, she actually does not have any rights to these songs, any publishing rights to these songs, which is an important clarification.
Yeah, so no songwriting credit on the actual song itself. Obviously, she'll be making royalties on the sound recording side through her the record deal or the production deal, etc., but no money from the actual exploitation of the song itself.
Right. Now here's where it gets tricky, because when it comes to talking about who wrote what song or who's in a room, we will never know those details because we weren't in those rooms and we don't know what those deals look like. However, there are plenty of examples in the music industry where, let's say, I am this production company. I'm helping you out with everything. You can't afford to pay me what my rate is right now because I charge $1 million a song. So in turn, I'm going to take your publishing.
Wow.
Because and I can justify that because the deals that I'm bringing you, you're going to get wealthy off of XYZ.
Yeah.
you know, whether you actually contribute to these songs or not may be irrelevant because of this prior agreement that we have. So that's one scenario.
Yeah, that's like an extreme version of what's called a 360 deal. A lot of people might have like heard of those, but I mean that is extreme. But anyway, it paints a picture.
Right, and that could be one scenario. Another scenario is, in fact, the songs in this catalog you actually may not have contributed to the songwriting to, and you know, these producers got with other songwriters, created these songs for you to record and then participate on the master side of things. But in fact, you did not actually participate making the song itself. No matter how much you think you killed your vocals on that track, or you know what you contributed to it, the actual songwriting portion of this you did not participate in. Therefore, you don't get, you know, rights to that part. Yeah,
and that would be that sort of assessment. There is actually the reality of how it is meant to work, right? It's like the actual recording process and the songwriting process are, you know, as the law sees it, like two different processes, and that's why you have songwriters which, you know, have affiliated with different bodies and unions, etc. And then you've got the actual performers and the recording artists, who are sometimes seen as a different body of people. Like, even though of course you can have it can be the same, you can be a singer songwriter, whatever, but there are very much different rights, and you know, it's in recognition of like the fact that there are different roles there, and the value being contributed by performers, let's say, on the record is not really necessarily anything to do with the actual songwriting side. So yeah, that's a scenario. And I think, but you know, for me, when I look at the narrative of Kelis's career, what sort of supports option A for me is sort of like what happens after her deal, right? So she records Kaleidoscope, her first album, which is moderately successful, has amazing bangers on there. You know, per her, and I see this happen with a lot of artists, because at the end of the day, you could be signed to a label, but there needs to be people in the building that can advocate for your career. Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah, so you know, per Kelis's situation, you know, she says that the people at the record label that were working on her first album got fired. Yeah, they got fired, or they left, or whatever. Laid off. There's natural churn just within any company. Like these people, like they're there 1 minute, the next thing they move on for whatever reason. Might be fired, might be have taken another job somewhere else. Right, laid off. Any quite options. Common that happens. Yeah. But the core team that was the advocate for Kelis at Virgin was no longer there. New people come in. They don't really understand, you know, the vision of Kelis in her career. They release a second album, but, you know, maybe for whatever reason it doesn't do well, because maybe they didn't put as much effort into it, or just commercially people weren't looking for that album at the time. After that second album underperforms, she gets dropped from that label. Her third album, which is in fact the album that the song in question is on, Milkshake, is released through the Neptunes' record label. Yeah, they had a JV at the time with Arista, wasn't it? I think for this specific deal, it was with Arista, but I think they had a couple of joint venture deals with other labels. Right. Okay. But I believe with this one, it was with Arista, and the Star Trek Entertainment. Yeah. So when I say, you know, when I brought that version A of like the production deal, you know, it seems like they have stuck around with Kelis at least for her first 3 albums, and even after she gets dropped from her initial label. So, you know, and then even reading, so they, you know, at least she claims, or, well, this is a fact, that there were other producers on her third album other than the Neptunes. However, they still participate in, I believe, most of the publishing off of that album. So that kind of leads to the narrative, okay, they have this, maybe, and they have a contract. I think there's a contract, you know, and again, we're speculating a bit because we weren't in the rooms, but I think by and large we can assume that, and they own the publishing rights for this song Milkshake.
So fast forward 20 years, 15 years, Beyonce wants to put out Renaissance, and she wants to interpolate Milkshake on her song Energy.
Yeah.
So her label clears that song with the rights holders of Milkshake.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that, you know, from a legal perspective, in terms of all the rights and everything they do, they did everything that is required and everything that is needed to do. So they didn't cut corners, they didn't use anything without the I'm going to say the requisite permissions, but certainly from a legal perspective, the requisite permissions. But that's not Kelis's gripe, was it?
No. Her gripe was not that, I guess, there was anything illegal that was done to obtain the rights to use that record. I think it was more of a moral argument.
Yeah, she felt that there was like, irrespective of, you know, what the law is and what the rights are, the fact that she alleges that no one, or actually she wanted Beyonce to pick up the phone and say, hey, just to give you a heads up, you know, we're going to use that song Milkshake on my new record. We're going to like sample it effectively.
Right.
And almost like just a bit of I think she was saying that like there was a courtesy that was overlooked there.
Right.
And then it gets you on to like, is that, you know, some people were saying like, is that something that happens in the music industry, you know? And then...
Well, I think there's a fine line here, because I think, you know, a part of her argument is that like artists like Beyonce and Pharrell Williams, etc., preach, you know, independent artistry. They speak against the predatory nature of the music industry. And in her eyes, they're not practicing what they preach because she was in a deal that she feels is unfair and predatory. And they are, you know, using what she believes is her song, even though by law it's not her song, and exploiting that without involving her in the process.
Yeah, that's actually this is where it comes, like, you know, you get into the weeds and you think like, has Kelis got a leg to stand on here? But you've got to put it against the context of everything we've just talked about, and that probably gives you, you know, like shines a bit of a light on why she felt as sort of like jilted or whatever, like angry as she did, because when you actually look at what, you know, Beyonce and the record label did, they went through the right paths, etc., and they cleared it as they should do. But Kelis's point was like, you should have told me, you should have like given me a heads up, should have given me a call, like just let me know, a courtesy call would have done, you know, whatever, just to sort of like, so we're cool sort of thing. But it was more like a slight, the fact that, you know, what, you use my song, the first I hear it is like actually hearing it on the record, and that's sort of like disrespectful. But the crazy thing is that you got to remember is that, like, you know, forget about the sort of background there of whether she was on the song or was she's not, but the record shows, and I mean the record as in there's a lot of records banded around here, but like, you know, the time will show, or the record books show, according to the publishing credits, that Kelis is not on that song. She is not one of the owners or the rights holders, a stakeholder in the actual song. Sure, she performs it on the record, but if you look at the songwriting credits, it's the Neptunes, it's Pharrell and Chad are on that song. So then you're kind of like, well, hang on a second, from Beyonce's perspective, you're getting angry about me not asking you for permission to use the song when it turns out you don't actually own the song.
And I think to put an emphasis on that, I think in our research we found out that song in fact was shopped around to other artists who said no to it, and then it landed with Kelis.
Yeah, so from Beyonce's perspective, like, you can see how, like, wow, this is like a little rich, like, I'm copping this flack from someone saying, you know, that I used the actual song, didn't use the recording, didn't use your vocal or anything like that, but I used the song, and you're saying that you're mad because I should have reached out to you to get like permission. Turns out you don't even own the song. However, the big thing is that you got to put that against the context of where Kelis has been coming from all these years. She feels that she and you know, like, we wouldn't go as far as to make, to take a side in this. This is just relaying the fact.
Right.
But she has maintained all these years that somehow she was tricked or duped out of what should rightfully have been hers on the publishing side of things.
Right. And I think even in this conversation, it does not take away from Kelis's artistry, nor does it take away with her accomplishments in her career. It's just like you were saying, just talking about the facts of it.
Yeah.
Which I think is important to point out. What I think is the genius of Beyonce's pettiness is that, like, because in my perspective, I think Kelis was looking for a bit more than maybe just the acknowledgement. I think there was maybe in her mind, she believed that because of the wrongdoing that is perceived in her past, that there was some sort of extra compensation or platform that Beyonce could have provided her, even though she does not own the publishing for this song. There's something that Beyonce could have done to reach her hand out to, give Kelis a spotlight or give Kelis extra compensation. And I would predict maybe that's what she was looking for rather than just like a phone call.
Yeah.
Maybe,
quite possibly. I guess, like, without, like, I haven't read that anywhere, but
right.
I mean, yeah, it's quite possible. You just say, like, give me a cut of this, like, composition or whatever.
And I think when I coming back to, like, Beyonce's side of things, it's funny because instead of maybe conforming to that want and picking up the phone, she just takes the interpolation off of the record entirely.
Yeah.
Which, quite frankly, doesn't have, like, the biggest impact on the sound of the song itself. That's
interesting, actually, when you think about it, because the first thing I thought of when I heard that was like, oh, that's just like the world we live in. Like, these major labels, like, are so reluctant to get into any sort of, like, copyright infringement territory or anything like that. And it's like, but then I thought, no, because they actually went through the right channels and they cleared it. It's been legally cleared. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. So then it's like, that is like a little bit of a slight, even more. Yeah. That didn't even occur to me. It's like, I'll just take it off. Done. Yeah,
I think people are sort of looking at that as like, this is a win maybe for Kelis because Beyonce is doing the right thing. But I think what maybe Kelis wanted, and again, we're speculating, but it's like she wanted more participation in the narrative of this new Beyonce album, and for it to be maybe a bigger conversation about artists and bad deals and, how maybe she's been wronged and sort of bring back Kelis to the forefront. But instead, Beyonce's like, okay, just take the song off. No big deal.
Yeah, we'll just take it out, done. I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, that's fair. Yeah. There's a point there.
Or, you could be right that they just didn't want the controversy and just to nip it in the bud, they just took anything that would be considered problematic off of the album.
Yeah.
But I don't know. For me, just it kind of feels like the first thing.
Yeah, maybe. So those are the facts, and those are how the spat came about, and the actual the actual nuance to it there, I guess, is that what Kelis is actually mad about is like this point where like you should have picked up the phone. Should have cleared it with me. I don't care if you cleared it all legally, but there was some sort of like moral obligation, sort of like woman to woman, artist to artist, to do that, to pick up the phone. And then, like it turns out that she actually, as the record books show, doesn't actually have any ownership or stake in the actual song. So those are the facts. But it goes back to, what are to that case study, like in terms of the actual learning, from what Kelis could have done better, or the situation she found herself on. I think like it is quite common for that stuff to happen like back in the day, and we're living in a world now where like
we're looking back on it. We have more information now, know. So I think it's easy because of that. We can look back and say, oh, you should have done X, Y, Z. But maybe what you're alluding to is there are certain things she could have done maybe to protect herself so that we don't get to this place, right?
Yeah, and that is, and let's explore those a little bit. But it's all to say that like now, like we're living in the information age,
right?
And like back then, that was 2003. Like the internet was not like it was or what it is now. It was a different kettle of fish, and right now I feel there's so much more information about how you should and should not do things, and you've got like YouTube, as we've talked about, like if you want to learn anything, it's on YouTube. And now we've got like platforms like the good old Record Shepherds podcast here.
If Kelis had the Record Shepherds podcast back in 2003, maybe we could have avoided it.
She could have followed the guidance of the Shepherds.
But I think some of that guidance and some of that protection she could have used as like, and again, without knowing what exactly happened, but something I've seen before is like, however many entities there are in a deal, everybody should have their own separate legal representation. That way,
absolutely.
That way you avoid any sort of conflict of interest. So like, if your production company is using the same lawyer as your record label, to me, that would be a red flag, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a like conflict of interest right there. And, but you know, I'd go one step further. Mm-hmm. It's important that you have your own legal representation. It's important that legal representation is actually familiar with the music and entertainment space. Yeah. Like, don't just use, you know, your brother who's a property lawyer or something like that. And you know, so look, I've said this before. When it comes to contracts and like sort of like what sometimes I refer to like baby contracts, etc., you don't necessarily have to go out and hire an attorney and incur a lot of attorney's fees, etc. But when it comes to deals that are going to have like a profound impact on your career, signing a production deal with anybody is going to have that's one of those deals. You don't want to get screwed out of your early music and your early songwriting and things like that. Anything where it's going to actually have a meaningful impact on your career or even a portion of your career, absolutely. You should be going to like a music and entertainment attorney, and they can work something out. You know, they're not all. Their fees will you know, obviously you've got the partners, and you know, you hear sometimes that it's the fees that lawyers are earning, and like that, those are the types of fees that make the headline on those big deals. But there's also very skilled, very accomplished junior attorneys that will be charged out at a much lesser rate. And even on top of that, you know, they can work something out with artists. If they're going to take artists on, sometimes they'll do it knowing that they're not going to be, you know, actually paid their full rate until like a certain point in that artist's career. So good point. Yeah, absolutely. You'll hear us say this again and again, but when you're talking about entering into, or you're thinking about entering into contracts that are going to have some sort of impact on a portion of your career, absolutely take it to a qualified music and entertainment attorney.
And that's for contracts and any deals. And then, you know, on the songwriting side, you know, what are some things that maybe you could do to protect yourself, or, you know?
Yeah, well, we had Emi Horikawa in here on a previous episode, who works as a publishing A&R for a major publisher. And one of her tips was always like, you know, take notes after a session. She was saying she encourages all her songwriting clients to do that. Like take notes after a session, because you could be in that room and, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, like a blow by blow account of like what happened in the songwriting session, but just, you know, a sort of rough reminder, even for yourself, as to what happens. Because a lot of the time these songs don't get finished until, you know, a good bit later, and then they don't get cut on the records until, you know, like sometime after that. So, you know, like I think it's super important just to be clear and upfront. That's another thing we talk about constantly, about, you know, like have these conversations and like sort of you know, ask people up front, you know, what, you know, their practices are. Do they send emails after the session or whatever? But I'd actually love to ask Danian, who we have in the studio today, because he is a songwriter by profession, as a, you know, songwriter and producer, and I'd love to see, you know, to ask him, like, yeah, what do you do, Danny, when it comes to sessions and splits and things like that?
Well, it always depends who you're working with. Depends on the tier of artists that you're working with. But if you're working with songwriters that are established and let's say they're already like signed to a major publisher, and you're working with other writers that are writing songs for these big companies, you got to make sure you have a conversation right before you start the session on how things are going to be split, because it's good for you, especially for up and coming singers and songwriters and producers, to have that conversation ahead of time, because when you're in the room creating with other people, usually you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen. But if we all agree that we're going to create something and we're going to make a new song and we're going to make something happen, it's good to agree in advance that whatever we create is going to be split equally.
Yeah.
Or in whichever is the best.
Yeah, that might
participation for everybody, you know? And that's a lot of companies. I've heard that a lot of people in Nashville do this practice, and they kind of like come to an understanding that, okay, if we're gonna work together on a song, let's try to split it evenly. But if that's not the case, if you don't have that conversation, which also happens, then what you can do is you can at least, like Amy said, make some notes about what happened on that session and maybe send an email to everybody involved with their names on it, and maybe an MP3 of the song, or like a whatever demo you made that day, to remind everybody, hey, there was 4 people in this room and we all made this song. So
yeah. I would say, like, you know, it is interesting, and probably when you are entering the world of like major artists and songwriting sessions for these type of people, there probably is some sort of expectation that can be hammered out right at the start. But it does, I'm sure it comes as surprising to a lot of listeners and viewers here that, like, what you're gonna work out at the start before you go in, right, what the splits are.
It seems very unnatural.
Like,
yeah,
it's like, how do we know that we don't go in there and like 2 of those 4 write 90% of the, you know, that's probably an extreme example, but you know, like, yeah, so, you know, like a lot of people I think would have like a sort of expectation of like, oh well, I came up with like half that song by myself because I did the verse and the chorus and quite a bit of the lyrics, and it's not necessarily going to be an even split.
Yeah, it's definitely not a set rule.
But it's up to interpretation too.
Yeah, and there's also different scenarios and different cases.
Yeah,
I mean, there's cases where you work with I'm gonna give you another example because from my own experience, I work with a major artist, and I was working with other songwriters from a major publisher, and usually we do this with the other writers because I've worked with them before. It's like, okay, we're gonna split evenly, but in this case, the artist wrote most of the song, and obviously, when the splits were to be defined and signed and everything, well, he made sure he claimed a major portion of that song, and then eventually the negotiation part comes in. You know, your representation also does a part to like deal with the whatever is gonna be the final split. Right. But my recommendation is just for writers, when they go into a room, try to touch the subject. Try to make sure that everybody is at least on the same page in terms of like how splits are gonna be done and how this part is gonna be taken care of, because a lot of cases happens when writers or producers, especially when they're not very experienced, they go into rooms and they make something and they just walk away not knowing what's going to happen, and then eventually somebody calls them. It's like, okay, you get 2%.
Right. Yeah, get it done up front as early as you can.
Yeah, but I think another interesting thing that you said in that was it depends on the level of artist/songwriter that you're working with. And I think that is super important too, because often in the industry, when these entities are negotiating these deals, and you are not, you may be, you know, compensating this producer/songwriter for what they can actually do on their song, but equally you are paying for their cosign on you as an artist, right? Mm-hmm. So if like I hire, you know, the biggest electronic DJ to remix this record, you know, I'm paying for that remix, but also it's a bit of a marketing tool as well. When I can say Avicii, you know, remix this single or whatever it is, and then you give them however much publishing to compensate them for that, or whatever fee that they require up front.
Yeah. That's a fair point. Yeah. That happens as well.
One thing I wanted to touch on before we closed out, because I feel like we need to set the record straight on this and in the whole publishing conversation, because I feel like this is very applicable to a lot of listeners who may be active on TikTok or YouTube, and they're doing like covers of these songs. So like, as an example, if Beyonce just wanted to do a straight up cover of Milkshake, and upload it to YouTube, would she need to get clearance from the rights holders to do that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's like one of the differences to be aware of when it comes to doing full cover versions and then doing, sampling another song or a track. And the answer is that you do need a license. However, certainly in the United States, under most copyright jurisdictions, and most jurisdictions who respect the sort of copyright laws that we operate within, once a song has actually been printed once, and then they call that like granting like the first mechanical license, right? Once it's had the first use, then after that, anybody can actually get a license to use that song. So the original songwriter or publisher cannot stop that process. Now, what actually happens is, because there is this compulsory licensing system here in the United States, most of the time people do go to the original rights holder, let's say the publisher, and they'll request a mechanical license and that, because they try to negotiate it more often. They don't want to pay the same rates as the sort of compulsory license would require.
Because it would be higher.
Yeah, they usually, a lot of record labels want to pay like 75% of the actual like going rate and things like that. So they'll negotiate it. However, if for whatever reason they were unable to get a license, or like the original license rights holder just refused or whatever, they could just go back to they can fall back in the fact that, all right, well, we'll go and get the compulsory license then. Right. Here in the United States, you got to go to the US Copyright Office to get that, and as long as you abide by, you got to pay the full statutory rate, and you've got to do like fairly regular accounting to the original rights holder of the original composition, then you can get that. So the reality is what that actually plays out like in the real world is, you can go and do covers, and you're not gonna, no one's gonna be able to stand in your way, right? Unlike samples of compositions, like when you're sampling a song or sampling a record, you do actually need to go and get permission. There's no like compulsory license for that. And the actual, you might think that's crazy, hang on, I can like cover the entire song and they can't stop me from doing that, but they can stop me from using a 10-second piece of that. Like that doesn't stack up. What's the logic behind that? And the answer is, because when you do a cover of someone's song, 100% of the royalties that are generated on the publishing side from the exploitation of your new track, so when it's like performance royalties, mechanical royalties, etc., that all goes straight to the original songwriter and their publisher. Like you don't get any cut of that. It's like it's 100% their song. You've covered it, and as long as you don't go too far within, there's a little bit of sort of artistic license to put it into your own style and your own character,
but you can't vary too much away. No,
you can't vary, and any sort of variations doesn't qualify for copyright protection as a derivative work. But that's the reason. And if you think about it on the other side, if I'm only using 10 seconds of your song and in my track, so I'm sampling it, and I've got like a 3-minute song, well, now you're into, well, hang on, is it, what do we do with the publishing royalties? Because it's like, like over like 95% of the actual song is like original. What I wrote, original, and 5%. But then you're coming at me and saying, this song, the only reason this song is going to do well is because of my 10 seconds, right? And that's why you're using it. Because if you don't use it, and basically it's a commercial negotiation then to actually figure out the splits and who's going to own what. So that's kind of the sort of underlying rationale behind it.
And then is it true that like these different platforms are paying for like a blanket compulsory license, which allows you, for example, to upload a cover of a song onto YouTube without you having to go to the copyright office directly to get it?
Yeah, it gets very complex because each sort of platform's working under its own systems that it's
internal
set up.
systems that it uses to regulate that.
YouTube's kind of different, but if we look at Spotify, for example, or any of these sort of like DSPs, these streaming sites, yes, part of the Music Modernization Act was the creation of the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which we've mentioned a few times on this, and I'll say it one more time. If you have not registered your songs with the Mechanical Licensing Collective and you're not already have a publishing admin deal with maybe like one of your distribution services, like the sort of publishing side of TuneCore or DistroKid, for example, then you should go on to the Mechanical Licensing Collective and register your songs there and your details, because you will be owed royalties. That was created to sort of act like a sort of blanket licensing solution for these DSPs, and like the likes of Spotify will benefit from that, Apple, Tidal, etc. YouTube, it's slightly different, and there'll be a lot of YouTubers who are like very well versed in this, so I won't go too far into it other than to say that when the whole point in YouTube is user generated content. Right. So this was happening quite a lot. You would upload a video, which is you and the copyright to the actual video, the sort of recording, the video, audio visual recording, but then you'd put on like somebody else's song and use it as like a sort of like it could be background music or whatever. And the way YouTube works, it's got its content ID system, and
it'll find that song in that video.
It'll find it, it'll flag it, and then however that rights holder, let's call it the publisher or the record label, has their own individual preferences set up, they get to choose whether to monetize your video. So they're now going to take 100% of the earnings of your video, so you don't get any of it. It doesn't matter how much of the song you used or whatever. Or they can have it taken down. Right, and then you get like a flag, a red flag, and it's like 3 strikes and you're out type thing. So
a lot of the times, because it's like, it depends on how egregious the video is, but they'll generally will claim the audio on that video if you're actually using it on YouTube for any reason. Yeah, and it's a cool trick. I mean, if you don't already know, you can scroll to the bottom of any YouTube video that's using a song, and you can see who the publisher is, you can see who the artist is, and you can see what the song is. That's often like a cool, quick trick to see, like, for example, if anybody is signed, or like, what song they're using for this video. Yeah,
absolutely. And you're right. Most sort of record labels have got it set to monetize. So that's why, people do that, and that their videos aren't taken down, but because, the publisher or the record label, the publisher more often than not will be making the money and just claiming it, and they get the revenues from your video. So
we tackled that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. That was a bit of a deep dive into it. Like, I think that was like a much more of it's a very technical episode. That there's a lot of things going on, but look, I would just say that. There's definitely a few takeaways. Like, Kelis feels like quite aggrieved of the deal. She feels like the deal she signed, or she thought she signed, was not what had been represented to her. And like, I feel for her, because a lot of artists anecdotally have found themselves in that situation, but ultimately it's so important to look at what you're signing, and it sounds like obvious, but would say it like, be careful what you're signing, have someone experienced, like hopefully a lawyer in the music and entertainment industry, look over it. there are ways to work out prices or fee structures and things like that. Like, don't be afraid of attorneys. They are there. They're used to working with lawyers, artists in your situation. So
yeah, and I think a takeaway from this is, you know, not using this situation as a way to sort of like personally attack any artist involved, but it's a learning experience. And, you know, I do believe there is a difference between bad business practices and bad business, and understanding the difference between those things. You know, were you wronged, or did you just not have all the information at the time? And that can mean a lot when it comes to your career, as we see in this example. So use this example, learn from it, and don't repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's both Kelis and Beyonce continue to make great music. So, you know, hopefully it's not a saga, it's just a spat, and they'll patch it up at some stage.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
I don't know. I think that's just about time to. Why don't you let everyone
plug everything?
Let everyone know where we're at. And
yeah, so you can follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook. You can watch our videos on YouTube. You can also listen to the Record Shepherds podcast anywhere where podcasts are played. And if you have any questions, comments, and concerns, email us at therecordshepherds@gmail.com. We're always looking for feedback and looking for different topics to talk about. So if you are also in New York and you feel like you have something to contribute to the conversation of music, feel free to hit us up. You never know when the boys are free, the shepherds are free, and maybe we can hold a conversation right here on this couch.
That would be great. We'd love that. Love to hear from you. So until the next exciting episode, continue to follow the guidance of the shepherds.
Don't be the sheep.
Be the goat. Thank you.
Ooh, turn that AC on.
Get that AC on. It is hot.